Hello, Deborah.
Hi, Craig. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Fantastic.
I've not seen you physically since before the new year. How is
that true?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
wow.
is.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm here.
Yes, you are.
In the flesh.
In the flesh. Did you have a good Christmas and New Year?
Thank you. I did.
Good.
Sensational, actually. I was travelling.
Sensational.
Sensational.
Excellent.
I spent most of the Christmas holidays travelling
Yes.
and spent some of my time in your home.
In my home country.
It was as bad as you told me it would be. Though we did manage a little snow, which is quite exciting. I can tell you that from my trip in Europe, ESG is very big in Europe right now.
It is, yes. And I think I do feel like there's a general movement towards ESG. Before we try and talk about what the global movement of ESG is, I feel like it's important to establish the foundation of what ESG is. Because 6 months ago, if you'd have said ESG, I'd have Googled it. Really? I have no idea what ESG is. Obviously, I could guess that it's something environmental, and I get that the E is environmental, but I have since learnt what ESG is. But I think for those of the listeners at home or at work who don't know what ESG is, what would you? Obviously, we've got environmental, social, governance.
Yep.
It's quite a broad-ranging subject. So how would you define it?
It is. Well, that's how you define it.
Yeah.
It's a simple acronym, really, and it's built to encompass a whole range of factors that help a business grow and exist in a sustainable manner. Yep. So at its heart is risk management on a whole lot of different factors. Environmental is obviously going to regard a whole lot of environmental issues that are becoming more and more important.
Yep.
We've seen huge climatic events which have really impacted many people and many companies. So we want to ensure that our businesses are developing environmental standards that make them sustainable and that make them compliant with all the new environmental standards. So you've kind of got that aspect of sustainability through climate change, as well as your regulatory controls and compliance with those issues. Then when we move on to your social, it's sort of your social license to operate, if you like. And increasingly we're seeing businesses needing to ensure that their labour hire policies, the way in which they look after their staff, to ensure that they're diverse and inclusive, that we are maintaining safe and healthy workplaces. All of these factors are going to fit into your social. You can even put into their labour hire practices is now going to get swept up with all the modern slavery compliance requirements as well. And then our governances, which is of course how we're structured and how we run, and our boards and how we govern our companies. And we start to look at diversity in our board levels and how we're maintaining that and ensure that we're being inclusive. Yep. And the way in which that we're operating at a high level is taking account of measures, anti-bribery and corruption, large international legislative regimes that are becoming applicable in this area. So whilst ESG is sort of talked about as something that companies are increasingly investing money in, when you break it down, it really incorporates and is very, very closely aligned with a lot of compliance measures.
Yep.
So we're starting to really see a lot of interplay between compliance and ESG.
Yep. And talking about the general mood, and we started off the conversation talking about, amazingly, Europe. And how they're kind of how ESG is becoming quite a hot topic. Certainly, the EU have introduced new measures quite recently to do with ESG and reporting, and Australia is starting to do the same. I think we've got some this year, some requirements with financial reporting and ESG alongside that. So, but wider than that, it feels like the general discourse seems like the topics that are covered by ESG and compliance with ESG seems to become more popular, and I think people are becoming more analytical, more critical about the companies they work for, how they interact with, who they buy things from, and what their commitments in ESG. Is that what we're finding?
Absolutely, Craig. You're spot on. I mean, we've definitely had big movement in terms of reporting measures that are now required in Europe. Of course, environmental protections in Europe are now huge, and compliance with those, that's your license to operate in Europe now. Tracking of carbon footprints and so forth are becoming very, very large. Australia's actually been criticised for, being far behind the level in which other countries are. But we are nonetheless incorporating quite a few new measures of reporting in terms of board reporting and financial control.
Yep.
So those sort of measures, combined with measures from the US, you're starting to see these companies who operate on a global scale and having to comply with all different measures in all different countries. They're really looking to set up sustainable measurable attributes that they can run globally, and therefore comply with individual standards wherever they may operate.
So it sounds like a fairly complicated subject.
Well, it's massive, but as you say, it's not just about the law and the laws.
Yep.
It's increasingly becoming about your social license to operate. I mentioned that in the beginning. That social license to operate now, I think, is as important as anything else. That's your reputation, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, your reputation is closely synonymous with your shareholder value and your sustainable growth. And if things happen to your business where your reputation is impacted, that greatly impacts your shareholder value. Look no further than what's been in the news this week with WiseTech. And, I don't necessarily like to call out companies, but it's a great example of a company who's lost over 40%.
It's insane how
of
much
their
value
share
they've lost,
value based on what amounts to some, sexual harassment or inappropriate conduct of, senior member of staff, and how much that can impact the reputation of a business, and how shareholders will just walk away from that business. They no longer want to invest in businesses that are not ensuring that they are compliant and that they are maintaining the standards that our society says are okay. So even though there may have been some breaches of specific laws there, it's not just about complying with the law. It's about how your non-compliance with the law is interpreted by the market. So it's not about the penalty. And that's how, we've seen, compliance move from, we're going to take on this measure, or we're going to do this training. So if we get audited, we can show the regulator we checked the box and we made sure that we were compliant with this law, so we won't get a hefty penalty. That used to be the reason that we went about following the law, whereas increasingly now we're sort of seeing this surge towards our company must have a great culture. It must operate with integrity from its core, so that these things, and it has to start at the top. And it has to filter down. And without that, our whole business model is at risk, because one breach, two breaches, and you're on the front page of the paper for all the wrong reasons. And then we see this massive plummet in share value overnight. It's really quite incredible, the impact that breaches now have on an organisation that's far, far greater than any sort of penalty that's going to come from a regulator.
Going back to your comment earlier about Australia seeming to be lagging slightly compared to the rest of the world, certainly Europe and other markets. A lovely little stat that we've pulled from our latest white paper, which is available soon on the website. 54% of respondents from a survey perceive Australia as being the late majority concerning ESG progression, with 0% considering the nation as an innovator. So sounds like Australia's got some work to do in terms of ESG legislation. And do we feel like there's going to be some change further down the line that we need to kind of consider?
No, it's interesting because I think a lot of that reputation stems from our poor environmental focus within Australia. We're still mining coal like it's going out of fashion, still have primary source of power. Most other countries have moved on from that. So, as long as we are not looking at a forward focus with the environment and energy and things like that, I think Australia is viewed as very backwards, especially in Europe. But in actual fact, Australia operates probably one of the most tightly regulated markets when it comes to legislation and compliance.
Interesting.
In the world, in terms of other standards. So if you look at our work health and safety laws, our respect at work laws, even our modern slavery laws are quite progressive. We're actually, I would say, probably taking a lead in some of those areas.
Yeah.
So, some of these sort of social attributes, I think Australia's very forward-thinking, at least a lot further ahead than other countries in that area. In fact, the United Kingdom has pretty much just replicated the respect at work legislation from Australia and the UK. So I think we've taken a very leading stance there. And certainly in terms of businesses needing to be compliant and what compliance looks like in Australia and the standards that regulators have set for companies is tighter than almost anywhere in the world. So when you look at what companies already do in order to meet compliance requirements in Australia, I think we're actually quite a long way ahead in many areas, but I think we fall behind in some of the environmental aspects. I think the whole world over, the way that boards are governed and our governance models, I think they fall foul a lot of the time of diversity. And there's been a huge focus on a move towards inclusivity and diversity numbers in Australia. But that's not just Australia. That's everywhere across the road. That's global. Yeah.
And that kind of a lot of the things you were talking about there with compliance in Australia doing fairly well with when it comes to social and governance, or being at least Australia being leaders when it comes to social and governance compliance. So this moves us quite neatly on into where the intersection is between compliance, which is obviously where SafeTrack works quite heavily, and ESG and the interplay between the two. So it moves us quite neatly on to the intersection between ESG, how ESG initiatives affect compliance, but also how compliance helps us meet ESG regulations, obligations, etc. So there's a lot of things there that you were mentioning just now that actually Australia's doing quite well with compliance. So where do you see as exactly that? What ESG initiatives affect your compliance, and where does compliance fit into ESG?
Yeah. So again, if we break these things down into the various different levels, we've got the environmental, social and governance. You can literally match up various legislative and compliance requirements with each area of ESG. So I think it's a nice thing to do to actually break it into silos and to say, okay, environmental, here's all the laws impacting us in relation to environment. Here's all of them in relation to social, and here's all of them in relation to governance. Now, what are our obligations as a business under each of these things? Maybe even further than that. It may not even be your obligations. It may be what is the socially acceptable standard under these things. So I might not actually be required to comply with some environmental laws, but the reporting of that sort of thing and the reporting of carbon footprint and something might be something that I'm going to choose to do because I understand as a business that wants to operate sustainably in a global environment, I'm going to need to do that. So by taking on some of these as voluntary things as opposed to because you have to, and I feel like that's where a lot of people get involved with compliance, you're actually taking your business to the next step where investors and shareholders are going to look at that business and say, okay, they've made a huge effort in relation to environmental compliance, tracking of their footprint, they've reduced it by such and such an amount. That actually gives a business or investors faith in a business, their operation, and that they're creating a long-term sustainable business. Because it's only a matter of time until those things are going to be required in some country around the world. So you may as well be doing them, even if it might be voluntary in one country. So what are the sort of global standards that we should be adhering to, and then voluntarily starting to create these reporting standards where we report to the market where we currently sit as a business. So it might be your benchmarking, but what is our goal? What do we want to do? in terms of improving that. So here's our current tracking. Here's where we think we sit at the moment. This is where we want to sit, and this is where we're going to do about it. What we're going to do about it. So it's not about a business coming out and saying we're perfect. It's actually probably more about a business saying we're not perfect, and these are some of the holes that we've identified, and this is what we're going to do in order to rectify those holes and to better ourselves, and this is our plan for the next 12 months. So what we're starting to see some of these companies that do ESG so well is that their company performance is no longer just about profit and revenue growth. It's actually about the long-term sustainability of the business by the investment that they're putting into these sort of ESG metrics and improving them to create themselves as a long-term sustainable business.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the big movement in ESG is coming to, is now that where businesses are needing to report on various ESG factors, the market is now looking to that report, and that's only going to increase over time. This ESG stuff is not going away.
No, not at all.
And I have heard so many senior directors, senior members in companies saying this is all woke crap. I don't want to deal with it. It doesn't move the needle for my business.
Yeah.
And, in terms of, is it going to immediately impact your share price? Is it going to immediately impact your profitability or your revenue numbers? And is it actually maybe going to detract from some focus on those things? Yes, it might. So when you've got shareholders demanding that you release certain profits and perfect, certain revenue growth, and half your team over here is worrying about ESG, I understand where that comes from. But understand also what happens if you don't have them in place and what the long-term ramifications are of that, or the short-term. So I think there's a balance that businesses are having to adjust to and work out what it is for them. Is where does this intersect with the short-term success of our business, with the long term of these goals that we need to be.
It's probably worth bearing in mind for them, and correct me if I'm wrong, the long-term market movement as well, from a brand reputation perspective, and what your customers, regardless of whether you're a business to consumer or business to business company, people are being more picky about the brands that they interact with, because that affects their reputation too.
That's right.
You see all the time companies investigated, or companies being associated with brands that have made a mistake or have been done for greenwashing or whatever.
Yep.
And you have to be really careful who they're associating with. So it's worth considering, I think, for those, a message to all the senior directors that might think that way. It might not affect sales figures this year, but it certainly will in 2 or 3 years, because the market's going to move.
You're spot on, Craig. I mean, we see a lot of businesses that we deal with, before they engage us, they require us to sign their supplier code of conduct. So that code of conduct is sort of, the way that they expect you to behave, which is in a way that's not going to hurt their reputation. They don't want to be associated with it. And it's an immediate right of severance of contract if you breach that code of conduct. Now, usually these codes are pretty standard, labour laws, modern slavery, bribery and corruption, all these sort of things that your business should be compliant with anyway. So honestly, signing these should not be an issue. But understand that your continued dealings with this business is absolutely tethered to you ensuring that your business is compliant with these things.
Yep.
So I think you make an outstanding point. Breach of anything in this area has the ability for you to lose a huge amount of work, and for people to not want to work with you moving forward.
Yep.
So I think there is an increasingly large link to future revenue. So that sort of this is woke stuff. Again, I would say that's very, very old way to look at this.
Yes.
And I don't think it's sustainable.
It's short-sighted, certainly.
Yeah.
I think, and I think it's as you can certainly see where public opinion and where things have moved in the past 5 years, and extrapolate that out. It's not going away, as you said. We're going to have to continue.
I mean, an interesting one is the your diversity levels in your workplace and the gender pay gap. So businesses are now required to report on, over a certain size, are required to report on the gender pay gap. And if you're reporting a very large gender pay gap, what does that say about your business?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're now being named and shamed.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to want to come and work for you.
No, it's a really, really good point, because I notice personally when I'm interacting with other businesses or when my wife, for instance, is working where she works, and looking at meetings and what the diversity is on the meetings, and sometimes you see boards that are packed full of men of a certain age and a certain
It's a fact. We don't need to shy
ethnicity.
away from it.
And I notice that now. And I think because of the discourse, and this isn't just compliance, this is generally at global attitudes, I notice the fact that there is a less diverse company, and I start thinking,
this doesn't.
I don't know. I don't like this. I don't want to interact with this business. So again, it's not woke stuff anymore.
No,
This is
absolutely not. Yeah,
pushing forward.
Another thing that's really interesting about it, these laws are sort of having this knock-on effect. So if you looked at something like the modern slavery legislation, it actually requires businesses that in Australia who have a revenue of over 100 million to be compliant with the laws.
Yeah.
So if you're under 100 million, you don't actually have to be filing a modern slavery statement. However, if you're providing services to a business that's over $100 million, one of the requirements is they need to audit their supply line.
Yep.
And part of their due diligence in auditing their supply line is to look to see if its vendors are compliant with the modern slavery legislation. So they're going to do an audit. They're going to audit their supply chain. They're going to ask questions. They're going to ask each of their vendors for a modern slavery statement. Now, if you're under 100 million revenue, you don't have to have one. But it looks a whole lot better if you do.
Yep.
So we're seeing now a whole lot of companies now turn to voluntarily providing a modern slavery statement and voluntarily opting into the law because it affects their ability to contract with other companies. So again, it's this voluntary. We can't not be compliant with this law. Even if it doesn't apply to us, we need to ensure that our supply lines have been audited because we want to work with this company, this company, this company. They want us to be.
And that applies through the whole gamut of legislation through ESG, everywhere where compliance can...
Absolutely, it does.
Interact,
but that said, in most other legislations are applicable to all businesses.
Yep.
It's interesting to see modern slavery, which is not applicable to all businesses, that businesses are choosing voluntarily to be compliant with it. I think that's the interesting point. So it's not just woke stuff. It's businesses are needing to do this in order to operate and in order to grow. So the ongoing sustainability of your business is absolutely going to be linked to you complying with certain standards.
And do we find that compliance with ESG overall is helping companies mitigate risks as well within their organisation?
At its fundamental level, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You know, when we look at compliance, whether it's ESG, it's effectively about risk management.
Yeah.
And we are literally saying, what are all the things that could go wrong and all the things that could happen and what are the things our business should be doing to ensure they don't go wrong, and what are we going to do and what measures are we going to have in place. And the whole idea of ESG is having measures by which we can measure certain aspects, you know, whether it's our diversity levels, it's a gender pay gap, it's our environmental footprint. There's a whole lot of our board diversity. All of these things are measures that we can report on, and people are now going to start to judge us upon.
And you said earlier about it being more about progression and not being seen, but also wanting to measure where you are at the moment and progress towards a better position when it comes to ESG. So what sort of metrics are we looking at? I mean, do we want to take an example? I don't know.
Well, you could take an example of gender pay gap.
Yeah.
You may find that you have a large gender pay gap.
Yeah.
And I mean, that could be there's a whole lot of reasons for gender pay gaps. It could be the type of staff you operate.
Yep.
It could be that you have let me just choose something that's a fair blue-collar workforce, but it's an in-home type thing, and there's a lot of females that work in the lower paid, and that's the majority of your staff.
Yep.
And then your executive team, it may actually even be a 50-50 ratio in that team, but because you've got so many lower paid females in a that could create a gender pay gap. So there are logical reasons for gender pay gaps some of the time, but more often than not, once we can slice that up and say, well, if we exclude that and we just look at our executive team, what's the gender pay gap there? So the ability to slice and dice and look and want to improve. I mean, there shouldn't be a gender pay gap in any business.
Yeah.
And if there is, your business should be looking to do something about that.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
So, and if you're not, then you have to, investors are going to start to ask why.
Yeah.
Why aren't you doing something about that? Is that okay to you? You know, what's actually happening here?
Yeah.
So it causes people to ask questions you don't want them to be asking.
Yeah. And I think there's a certain amount of being reasonable, not expecting things to change overnight, I assume.
That's critical. A lot of people will come to us with a problem. You know, their problem might be they're not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
What do we do? Where do we start? And I always say, you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, just start.
Yeah.
Do something. And then we'll work from there and we'll develop and we'll go from there. But doing nothing is no longer an answer.
Yeah.
So you would be alarmed at the company names that come to us that don't have a compliance program in place. Sometimes I am like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. We're more than happy to help, but it's not like everybody's got their ship in order. It's really not. We're still on a journey. I also think that what we've seen happen in the last 5 years, and I think it sort of started around COVID, the Me Too movement.
Yep.
There's been massive cultural shift in our societies.
I completely agree. Yeah. And we've all felt it.
Yeah. And people don't change overnight.
No.
And I think it's really important that we adopt supportive workplace environments and cultures. We've got plenty of training. We've got plenty of support mechanisms to help people make that shift.
Yeah.
We need to ensure that our staff are okay to speak up and go, this isn't okay, I'm not okay, that person feels supported to do that. So I think the whole culture of an organisation is really vital.
Yeah.
So that we're no longer just talking about checking boxes. We're actually talking about an organisation looking at itself holistically and saying, what cultural changes do we need to be making and how are we going to get there and what does our journey look like?
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to do this year, this is what we're going to do next year. Here's the KPIs that we've got for ourselves and that we're setting ourselves, and hopefully we're going to blow them away.
Yeah.
So I think your KPIs in these areas and setting yourself goals and improving them is really, really vital because it's a journey.
And it's all about the setting your KPIs, as you said, measuring regularly and showing some improvement over those periods. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And you asked earlier about the intersect between ESG and compliance, and I feel like some of the systems that we've got for compliance in place already can be easily leveraged and utilised for creating metrics for your ESG reporting. So if we can create audits, checklists, surveys, benchmarks, they can all be utilised really effectively for ESG reporting. So investing in compliance management systems that allow you to have a compliance platform for managing. We see a lot of the time people putting training on a learning management system. I certainly don't believe that it belongs there. It should belong on a compliance platform sitting alongside the rest of your compliance initiatives. And a system that's easily reportable on each area of compliance, and that you're running systems and checks and surveys within a centralised, transparent system, as opposed to a spreadsheet here, a spreadsheet there, a document here, an audit over here. Like when your data's all over the place, reporting and metrics are very, very hard to gather.
Yeah.
So I think in order to make a lot of the reporting easier, ensuring that you're utilising a system that can help you do that.
Well, we've got clients that have been using a discrete compliance platform to bring everything together for literally a decade or more, and they're certainly in a great position because they know that they're sitting quite nicely, knowing that if they ever get audited, it's all in the one place.
Well, absolutely. I mean, let's just take modern slavery. One of the requirements under the legislation is you've trained your staff, having an ability to easily report and go, okay, here's all the training that I've done, here's all the people. A lot of people are training their suppliers too.
Yeah.
So hard to get your suppliers on your LMS. Because it's usually for internal staff. So having an external system where all those supplier audits are all sitting there, all of their reports, all of their policies, they're all sitting there in the one place. As a supplier, we receive a lot of modern slavery audits from our clients, and they're often Word documents or Excel spreadsheets. And I'm like, how are you compiling this back at the back end? This is
a lot of work.
Enormous.
Yeah.
The amount of work that your people are having to do back, and we've got a tool for that. If you want a tool, we can give you a tool. Like there's tools for that.
Yeah.
You know?
And we've been using it for compliance for years on end. We're talking quite a lot about, or just mentioning surveys and taking measurements. How would we go about making sure that we're getting buy-in from not only our stakeholders but our employees as well, members of the organisation? What's the best way from an ESG perspective?
It's a broad question. I mean, I think metrics and KPIs and improvements in those things is a great way to go. Benchmarking is a great way to go.
Yeah.
If we're wanting engagement from our employees, making sure that we're teaching them and training them in a way that's engaging, so that they understand, so that they want to be on board.
Yeah.
And wanting to be on board also comes down to culture.
Yep.
So, cultures are, this sort of, I like to think that both culture and compliance are the lifeblood that run around an organisation, and I really think they should be like this together, running around together. There's no point having compliance running around this way and culture trying to run around the other. They're not going to work.
Just doesn't work.
So they need to be closely aligned. You need a compliant culture. And the way to get that is to bring your staff on board, to engage your staff, to not provide them some checker-box training that's not engaging and doesn't teach them what they need to know. But it's to make that training engaging, make it about your organisation, bring your leaders in to ensure that they're backing it and they're saying why this is important to our business. Yeah. Not just we're doing this because this is what the law says, but, say work health and safety, for instance. We want all of our staff to come to work safe, healthy and well. We want them to go home the same way. And that is vital to the ongoing business that we operate. And this is what we're going to do about it. And you're a vital part in that. And we need you to spend the time to understand this, and in order to be part of our business, to agree to comply with what we're going to ask you to. That's much more compelling than go, the work health and safety laws say you must do this. That's a really different message.
Yeah.
So if you want people to learn, you have to make them want to learn.
Lift with the legs, not with the back. Drilled into you. Okay, yeah. And I guess the measurement and involving your staff in that measurement is kind of an indication that they're being listened to, or they're wanting to be brought along on the journey as well. And publishing the results of those measurements and showing the progress, I would imagine, helps the workforce feel like they are part of the compliance and part of the ESG commitments, or any commitments when it comes to making their workplace better and their experience better at work. Because that's at the end of the day, that's what it's about. ESG, or regardless, any measure of compliance, it's not there to get in the way. It's there to make sure everyone has a better time at work.
That's right. Absolutely. And I think, in terms of what you're talking about is transparency. Yeah. And it's okay to say we've got an issue in this area, we're going to do something about it. As opposed to have nothing to see here. So transparency of data to staff, not just to we've talked about transparency to the market in general, but to staff as well. It's really, really important. And I think a staff member's going to be more patient with an organisation that says, hey, we've learned that we've got some issues in these areas, and these are the initiatives that we're going to take on to address these issues. So then if you're going to be asked to, for instance, a training session about a particular topic, you know why. It's like, we've got an issue in our workplace about this, and now we're going to look at some training initiatives in this area to overcome, or it might be a new policy, or it might be a new procedure. But you can follow it up with the reason why, as opposed to, you've just got to do this because I'm telling you to. So I think the transparency is really important in giving staff a why and a reason, and involvement in the reason for doing it.
So it's a fairly broad topic, fairly complicated sometimes. The market's moving. Do we find that there's some misconceptions about ESG? We mentioned earlier that actually Australia was leading when it comes to the social and the governance part, but is perceived to be lagging behind with the environment. Do we find that there's other misconceptions and other challenges that businesses
I think when
come
businesses think that compliance is a marketing tool, rather than something that their business actively needs to be engaged with at its core. I think that's probably the biggest misconception. It's sort of woke marketing stuff is the biggest one that we see out there, and it's fundamentally incorrect. We're seeing businesses who've really led with an ESG perspective perform very, very favourably on the stock market. We are seeing a distinct link to shareholder value and ESG investment.
Really interesting.
I think that sort of is starting to be disproven by the market. I think that will continue to be the case. So we had ESG as a sort of a PR exercise. I think additionally there's a lot of thought that complying with ESG initiatives can be hugely expensive and burdensome. And I think that that can be met with the exchange of, if you were to link them more tightly with your compliance activities and create a centralised reporting structure and technology and tools that allow you to meet both measures at the same time, then I think that that cost benefit analysis starts to play out. I think if you're just doing ESG on its own without any looking to other initiatives that you might have in your business on its own, it is going to be expensive. Compliance on its own is expensive. You can't afford to be in business without being compliant. So just make sure that you're linking those two really closely so you can sort of meet both requirements at the same time. And I'll use the training one again. If you have to train under modern slavery legislation and report about that, you also need to be training your staff anyway. So make sure that you're doing your training in a way that's easily reportable. So I think we're really, we've seen a huge movement towards online training. I think having all of those training results and recorded in a centralised location is going to become critical. So online training is fantastic for those sort of reporting measures. And even if you can assess, you can do knowledge checks at the end. Some statistics showing, movement in knowledge and change and increasing in pass marks or something like that show a growth of knowledge. Whatever statistics that you can get out of your system and you can utilise, that can be really beneficial. And then, of course, you've got the age-old problem with anything to do with regulation is staying abreast of the constantly changing regulation, especially if we're going to now be reporting from publicly with this data. It's really important that things are up to date and you're following the legislation and that you've got a system in place that is going to keep your business and organisation up to date with the changing law. As
you mentioned earlier, with making sure that you're compliant with global legislation or trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit is quite important, isn't it?
Absolutely right. I think if we're starting to look at some of the organisations in Europe, and Europe is potentially further along this path than anyone, no business is going to be impacted negatively by taking on some of the measures that they are requiring companies to do. So I actually see it as beneficial for businesses in the long run.
So as part of trying to get ahead of the curve, obviously there's going to be changes. The market moves. As you said, it's quite a complicated subject that's changing quite a lot. What's the best way to protect ourselves or to try and predict what the future is going to look like for ESG?
I think that probably one of the best investments that a company can be making right now is looking at bringing in systems and reporting platforms that they can utilise that allows them to meet compliance requirements and derive data that they can utilise for ESG reporting at the same time. The investment in that sort of a system is going to be vital moving forward. I think that it is likely, probable, that our ESG measures and our reporting measures increase over time.
Yep.
They're not going away and they're not going to decrease.
Yep.
So the reports that you are going to need to make and the things that you're going to need to report upon are going to become more and more robust. So ensuring that you've got data at your fingertips, that you're investing in technology that is flexible, that allows you to deploy things that the way that works for your organisation, I think is really, really vital.
Yeah.
And I think that investment in technology is something that we're really going to see as a big future trend here.
And the earlier that you can start measuring and gathering that data and having that consistent measurement, presumably is going to protect you further on.
I mean, we see it at SafeTrack. We've obviously run compliance training online for a very long time, but we're seeing a lot more organisations now moving to use a platform for, checklists, audits, surveys, those sort of things. And in fact, we can now run meetings and so forth from it, so that you've got all of that information is all on one platform that you can report from the one place. Having that centralised data and starting to think about this from that centralised point of view, I think is a really important part of your organisation, getting their whole head around it. If you're having all different departments use different things and different tools for this and different tools for that, come reporting time, gathering all that data from a whole lot of disparate sources is going to be really burdensome for you. So taking time now to go, okay, how can we centralise this? What does that look like? How can I use it for? Actually, I could use that platform for this, and that, and I'm going to be able to get reporting out of it for X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E. All of a sudden, you're going to make this and the compliance with these areas a lot easier for yourself and your business moving forward.
Making sure you got your ducks in a row now is going to see ROI in the future, because you're saving time, you're saving effort. As you mentioned, all the departments that have touch points that are needed to get involved in this. When you think about it from a resource point of view as well as from an investment point of view,
absolutely,
ROI is massive.
And trying to do this yourself is difficult. There are specialist people out there that can help, and monitoring the law and ensuring that you're staying abreast of regulatory updates and change, and ensuring that all of your content, whether it's your training, your policies, are all up to date with the law. That's really difficult to do on your own. There's a lot of legislation out there. So I think ensuring that you've got systems, technology, vendors out there that can help you to be compliant is going to allow you to focus more on the issue that boards have. This is woke stuff. No, it's not woke stuff. But if you put in place good systems that allow you to get back to managing your business whilst doing this as part of running your business as a holistic way of going to market, then that's going to make this all a lot easier.
And we found quite recently, conversations we've been having, people are struggling to keep up, aren't they?
They are.
They don't really know where to start or where to continue.
Well, there's been a pretty big onslaught of change in legislation in recent years, and as I've said, we are undergoing massive change. And there's whether we're talking about respect at work, we're talking about psychosocial risk,
rights disconnect.
There's huge changes right now happening to the anti-money laundering provisions, huge changes to privacy laws, modern slavery. It's undergoing massive flux and change. So we're developing this legislation really, really quickly, changing it really quickly. We've now got all of the new cyber legislation and under 16s, and compliance with that for some businesses is a really
absolutely massive, isn't it?
Huge thing. Yeah. But yes, the legislation's coming thick and fast, and trying to stay abreast and up to date with it and report upon it is certainly difficult. So I think the big future trend here will definitely be systems and technology. Yeah,
helping internal teams fight the fires they need to internally, changing culture, etc.
Absolutely. And I think what we're going to see moving forward in addition is more globalisation of ESG standards.
Yes.
I think we're going to see different standards from different countries come in, and we all agree at some point that these are the core metrics that everybody reports against.
Right, it has to happen, doesn't it, for any businesses that want to deal internationally?
Absolutely right. So if you're going to grow, you're going to need to be compliant with standards everywhere anyway. So, that's right.
I certainly got a lot out of this. Are there any closing thoughts that you had? Anything that you wanted to wrap up with?
Yeah, I think that ESG, it's being talked about as this separate item over here. I don't think it needs to be.
Yeah.
I think if businesses can start looking at it as a holistic linking between the way they go to market, their sustainable social license to operate, and linking in with it with compliance and with compliance measures, then looking at your ESG strategy moving forward makes more sense. And I think organisations really need to be thinking about what systems, processes that they're going to be utilising for reporting and standardisation of their data, so that when they are adopted measuring or surveying metrics, that they're in a centralised place that they can do that through.
Yeah.
So I think that looking at how we're going to tie all these things together, I think it's going to be a really big focus over the next few years.
Cool. Thank you very much for the chat.
Thanks, Craig.
I want to see you too. I'll see you very soon.
Minutes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.